The most dangerous moment in any market is not the storm. It is the calm that arrives afterward and whispers that you have figured the whole thing out. Brian Hunter was 32 years old, and he believed he had. From his desk in a glass tower in Greenwich, Connecticut, he could see Long Island Sound. On this morning in early September of 2006, the water was flat, the Atlantic was quiet, no storms on the horizon, and for a man who had made his fortune betting on hurricanes, quiet should have felt like peace. It did not. Somewhere in the numbers on his screens, something was already going wrong. A year earlier, Hunter had been a legend. When Hurricane Katrina tore through the Gulf Coast and shut down a third of America's natural gas production overnight, his bets exploded in value. His trading desk made over $1 billion in a matter of weeks. He took home a bonus estimated at close to $100 million. A quiet Canadian kid from Calgary, barely past 30, had become the most feared energy trader on Wall Street. Now, in the next 7 days, $6.6 billion would vanish from one of the largest hedge funds in America. Not over years, not over months, 7 days. This is the story of Amaranth Advisors, and of a simple, brutal lesson that the financial world keeps refusing to learn. When you grow large enough to move a market, you can no longer escape it. You become the thing you are trying to predict, and you cannot outrun yourself. To understand how it happened, you have to understand what Hunter was actually doing, because it was not as reckless as it sounds. He was not gambling on whether gas would go up or down. He was trading the spread. Winter contracts, when people heat their homes, normally cost more than spring contracts. So you buy winter, you sell spring, and you collect the gap. It is the kind of trade that sounds almost boring at a dinner party. But boring changes its nature at scale, and scale was the whole story. By the summer of 2006, Hunter's positions had grown so enormous that they represented a meaningful slice of the entire natural gas futures market. Some estimates suggested Amaranth controlled contracts equal to the yearly gas consumption of several European countries. At that size, Hunter was no longer placing a bet on the market. He had become the market. And the moment that happens, a trap closes quietly behind you. You cannot sell without crashing the price against yourself. Every contract you try to unload tells every rival you are wounded. The bigger you get, the more cornered you are. So here is the first question regulators spent years avoiding. Who looked at a single trader holding that much of a national energy supply and decided that was acceptable? The answer goes back to Katrina and to something very human. Before that hurricane, Hunter's aggressive bets had made the people around him nervous. Risk managers whispered. Some thought he was dangerous. Then Katrina hit, the bets paid off spectacularly, and overnight every doubt evaporated. The man who had looked reckless now looked like a prophet. And when a trader looks like a prophet, the people whose job is to say no suddenly find it very hard to open their mouths. This is the part the textbooks leave out. They were not afraid of the gas market. They were afraid of being the person who reined in the firm's biggest earner and turned out to be wrong. Saying no to Brian Hunter felt like betting against success itself. So they said yes. They let him double down, then triple down. By September, Amaranth was no longer a diversified hedge fund that happened to trade some energy. It was an enormous energy bet wearing the costume of a diversified fund. Then, the weather betrayed him. The 2006 hurricane season turned out to be one of the quietest on record. The storms that were supposed to spike prices simply never arrived. Those winter contracts Hunter had loaded up on began to look badly overpriced, and the other sharks in the water could smell exactly what he was holding. On a single week in mid-September, the spread between winter and spring contracts began to collapse. Hunter's positions started bleeding hundreds of millions of dollars a day. The arithmetic was merciless. For every tiny move against him, Amaranth lost a fortune because the position was so vast. By the middle of that week, losses passed $1 billion. By Thursday, $3 billion. The fund was hemorrhaging money faster than its own brokers could process the margin calls. Amaranth's leadership did what cornered people do. They panicked, then they begged. Executives flew to Calgary to plead with larger energy funds for a rescue. They offered to hand over Hunter's entire book at a steep discount, but the positions were so monstrous that no single buyer could swallow them without setting off even more chaos. And every hour they hesitated, rival traders pressed harder, shoving the spread further against them, smelling the kill. The other funds did not arrive to save Amaranth. They arrived to feed on it. JPMorgan and Citadel, two of the most sophisticated players in the energy world, did not rescue the dying fund. They bought its positions at distressed fire sale prices. They understood that once Amaranth was forced to liquidate, whoever controlled that unwind would print money from the wreckage. They profited from the very collapse they were watching happen in real time. By the 21st of September, it was over. A fund that days earlier had held more than $9 billion was left with around $2.5 billion. $6.6 billion had simply evaporated. It was the largest hedge fund collapse since long-term capital management nearly took down the system in 1998. And now we reach the part that genuinely unsettles people. Brian Hunter walked away. Not to prison, not to bankruptcy, not even, for very long, to unemployment. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission later charged him with manipulation, but the case ground on for years and ultimately fizzled into almost nothing. Unlike Nick Leeson, who went to a Singapore jail for sinking bearings, or Jerome Kerviel, who was prosecuted for the losses at Societe Generale, Hunter never spent a single day behind bars. Why? Because, technically, he had broken nothing. He made a massive, visible, entirely legal bet, and he lost. The failure was not in the trade, it was in a system that allowed one human being to accumulate that much danger, while everyone with the authority to stop him stayed silent because the money was still flowing. Amaranth had risk managers, it had compliance officers, it had a board of serious people. And every one of them watched Hunter's positions swell month after month and chose not to interrupt a winning streak. They were not managing market risk, they were managing their own careers, and those two jobs only look the same until the day the weather changes. Remember too that the losses were not abstract. Among the investors wiped out were pension funds, the carefully guarded retirement savings of ordinary public workers who had never in their lives heard the phrase natural gas spread, and who certainly never agreed to bet their futures on a quiet autumn in the Atlantic. Today, Brian Hunter lives largely out of public view, reportedly still trading energy from Calgary. The industry added a few position limits after the disaster, patted itself on the back, and moved on. But the deeper architecture never changed. A single trader with enough conviction and enough capital can still grow so large that no regulator will fully understand the danger until the unwind has already begun. The lesson of Amaranth was never really about natural gas. It was about concentration itself. When one fund owns enough of any market, it stops being a player and becomes a hostage. The trades that crowned Brian Hunter a genius in 2005 were the same trades that destroyed him in 2006. Nothing changed except the weather, and the weather has never once read a trading model. But here is what should keep you watching. Becoming the market for a single autumn was enough to obliterate Brian Hunter in a week. So imagine a man who did it deliberately, on purpose, for 10 straight years. And not with something as wild as natural gas, but with one of the most essential metals on the planet. Imagine a quiet executive in Tokyo who at his peak controlled roughly 5% of all the copper on Earth and convinced the entire world it was normal. His name was Mr. 5%. That is where this story goes next.